sleepfam.news.
Get ready to dive into the science of sleep with a leading sleep neuroscientist with over a decade of research experience, the head of applied sleep science at SleepScore Labs. Dr. Elie Gottlieb is here, and the FAM podcast starts right now. Hey, are you a mattress retailer looking to supercharge your business? Introducing Podium, your secret weapon. I use it, I'm a huge fan of it, and with Podium's AI-powered lead conversion, you can engage with customers in seconds via text, making it feel like they're talking to a friend. But hey, that's just the beginning. Podium offers texting, payments, reviews, website chat, and more, all in one place. You've got to be the most responsive retailer to help customers solve those sleep problems in the moment. Harness the power of Podium today and start growing your business. Visit podium.com right now to learn more.
Welcome to the FAM podcast with Mark Kinsley. This is where the best in the betting business get even better.
Welcome to the FAM podcast. I am so excited today to have Dr. Elie Gottlieb. Now, just the other day, Elie, I talked with Colin, who's the CEO of SleepScore Labs, and we were talking about how SleepScore Labs, I mean, this is on your website. Anybody can go look it up. You supercharge business growth, that's a key term, business growth, by leveraging sleep science, technology, and data to drive better consumer offerings and health outcomes. Okay, that's a great sort of broad brushstroke to get us into this conversation. But what is it exactly that SleepScore Labs does in the real world to drive business growth? How do you help companies? What do you do with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. It depends on the partner, it depends on the company, but we have two main offerings, right? First is we leverage our evidence-based, recently shown in a randomized control trial, which is the gold standard for scientific research, that our sleep improvement program actually improves sleep. It's a very scalable program, and we package that up into APIs. So if a leading consumer wants to come in and inject sleep improvement offerings into their app, we can provide that for them based on evidence-based science, the leading edge when it comes to consumer sleep science and circadian science. So that's one side of the business. And then if a partner also is interested in validating, creating some claims around their consumer product, we have an in-house research team that conducts R&D services. So let's say a leading company like a mattress firm wants to come in and test whether or not some of their mattresses or other sleep improvement products are actually improving sleep. We conduct these at-home research studies and are able to make claims off of the findings from those studies. And then we always say we don't just practice what we preach, we sort of publish it. So my team is responsible for taking all these incredible insights, feeding them back into what we find in the literature and in our own APIs, and then publishing it. So all of the results, many of the results that we see in our validation studies are then published or presented at academic conferences, because we think that science is critical, and sharing the science is critical.
That's incredible that, honestly, this hasn't been done sooner but sleep science is such a nascent field when you think about the limited number of decades that we've actually been looking at what the heck is going on when we pass out a third of our lives. But now we're starting to get savvy consumers that just don't want marketing. They want an evidence-based ecosystem that says, hey, here's some data around what happens whenever you get this type of pillow under these type of conditions. Let's actually go into a very specific one that I thought was fascinating. This is up on your website as well. If you dig a little bit at sleepscore.com, it was the study that's now been published about what happens whenever a consumer is fitted for a pillow. So a lot of people go in and they're like, I got a mattress and I'm going to go to the big box store and grab a trashy pillow, versus, that 20 to 30% of your spine that's being supported by the pillow in conjunction with the right mattress, and somebody gets fitted for it. What happened when somebody was fitted versus not being fitted for a pillow?
Yeah, I mean, it goes to show that we're all unique sleepers, and although we tend to have a preference towards a specific type of pillow or a specific type of mattress, we've essentially shown that when we conduct a fitting process for someone. So we ask them specific questions around what kind of, if they're warm sleep, if they sleep warm, if they, their preferences, do they sleep too short, sleep too long? When we essentially combine that in a questionnaire and we ask people to fill that out, and based on that, we have a proprietary way to fit them with a specific pillow. Those that use that process versus those that just select it on their own are much more likely to report better overall sleep quality versus those that didn't. So, it just shows that it's objectively measured in the at-home environment as well. It's not just like we're asking questionnaires. We actually measure people's sleep in the at-home environment in the wild and see whether or not there are differences. So, in short, the improvement is there in those that have gone through that pillow fitting process versus those that haven't.
We're here on the FAM podcast with Dr. Elie Gottlieb. He's the head of applied sleep science at SleepScore Labs. And we sort of just dove right in, which I love to do. But let's back up a little bit. Tell people about yourself, your background, and what led you to SleepScore Labs. And then what's a day in the life like?
Yeah. And again, thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's exciting to talk to a wide range of audiences. I'm usually talking to a bunch of nerds and hopefully some nerds that are listening here as well. So those with a sleep science background or those without, hopefully they learn a thing or two. My background is in neuroscience, so trained in PhD in neuroscience with a focus in sleep and chronobiology. But backing up a bit, during my undergrad, I was actually a philosophy major and a religious studies major, and fell in love with this field of positive psychology while I was learning about all these really interesting philosophical areas. And that was essentially the study of happiness, the scientific study of happiness. And it was started by Martin Seligman. Highly recommend some of his research and reading if you haven't, read it already. But essentially, his thinking was he was a practicing psychologist for a very long time. And essentially, Martin Seligman, he said, "Look, I'm sick and tired of treating the sick. His whole career, he's been getting someone from -20 to 0. How do I get someone from 0 to +20? And that is sort of my ethos around sleep improvement now. It's like there is a large chunk of sleep physicians and the clinical sleep space that are treating those with sleep disorders, and they absolutely require treatment, right? And it's an active area of research and intervention. But for the rest of the population that doesn't have a sleep disorder, which really is 50 to 75% of the population, depending on the literature that you're looking at, but still suffer from just poor quality sleep, what's out there for them? What are some evidence-based ways to improve their sleep and optimize sleep for performance for them? And that's sort of my area of expertise now. It's in the sort of subclinical realm where we're trying to improve sleep for those without sleep disorders, but still requires sleep improvement to optimize really the rest of their health and wellness. The truth is, if you're lucky, you'll spend about 26 years of your life sleeping and another 4 years of your life trying to fall and stay asleep. So, there's a large chunk of the population that requires sleep improvement that doesn't have a sleep disorder. And I think as I mentioned, my PhD is in neuroscience, focused in sleep and chronobiology. And I was working at Johnson & Johnson, leading some of their sleep research. And I found that there's an opportunity to really scale sleep improvement for the global population using digital health interventions and digital health solutions like SleepScore's APIs and our products. So I joined SleepScore about 3.5 years ago now. Haven't looked back. Had so much fun working with a range of different partners and incredible leaders in the sleep space. And it's a bit of my background.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very impressive, number one. And I love that you're able to sort of take that neuroscience background and start using it in ways that, like you said, scale, more connection to the consumer, more evidence to help them make good decisions, more of a shining light, a bright shining light on the sleep space. I talk a lot about with other sleep nerds out there, how sleep is the foundation of health and wellness, with the pillars of mental and nutrition and fitness benefiting from that foundation of good sleep. And people know it, intuitively. They're like, yeah, I know I feel like junk whenever I don't sleep well, but they don't a lot of times know how during the day to pursue good sleep and understand their own bodies and brains and the way that we come at sleep. And so there's all kinds of like emotion, it seems like, tied up in sleep. Whenever you work with companies these days, or even get into that consumer space, what are you seeing? What's the real issue here? Like, how do we break through and get people's attention and actually get them into a habit environment where they're going to get good sleep? Are there any sort of things that bubble up as like, yeah, this is number one and number two?
Yeah, there's so much. I think first and foremost, we have to remember that the sleep process actually starts the second you wake up in the morning. So most people think of sleep, well, I need to create a pre-sleep wind down routine. And that is absolutely correct. I think a wind down routine is like super important for a lot of people. But the second that you wake up in the morning is really when what we call sleep pressure. That starts to build up. And there's really two things that happen that really force us to go to bed and stay asleep. And that first thing is sleep pressure. And very simply, it's the longer we stay awake, the higher the sleep pressure. It builds up. So people, for example, try to go to bed super early, but they haven't built up the sleep pressure in order to actually fall asleep. The second is our circadian rhythm. So it's our internal biological clock. And this is another example where if you are genetically primed to be a strong evening type, but someone is trying to force you to go to bed at 9 p.m., it's just not going to happen. It's very difficult, right? So understanding those two sort of foundational pieces of sleep science, I think, can really help people um, gather the necessary information to make informed decisions about their sleep health. And I think, as we'll probably talk about later, light is one of the single most effective cues, external cues, that influences our circadian rhythm. I think for a long time we've been demonizing blue light, for example. You have blue light blocking lenses everywhere. And yes, we know that right before bedtime, there is a very strong effect for excessively bright blue light on our ability to release melatonin. But blue light during the day is really important. So as soon as you wake up in the morning, broad spectrum sunlight from the sun, which contains a lot of that important blue light, actually sets our circadian rhythm, telling our brain it's time to be awake. And they've done studies where they've actually had looked at productivity, for example, in the workforce, and they had some rooms that were darker, some rooms that were lighter, and of course the lighter rooms that had broad spectrum light with containing short wavelength blue light, those that were in those rooms worked significantly harder. Their productivity improved. And we know it's just important for alertness. So I think, as we work with a lot of our partners, a lot of this just comes down to subject matter expertise. For example, going back to light, we know that if you get sufficient light during the day, it can negate some of the negative effects of excessively bright light, blue light before bedtime. In other words, if you're getting sufficient bright light during the day, in the early afternoon, and then you're in a computer and it's bright, the fact that your brain saw that blue light earlier during the day, it's gonna be like, okay, I know what time it is. I'll still be able to fall asleep easily. So, some of this research, a lot of people don't know about, and so a lot of the work at SleepScore is applying some of the latest and greatest sleep science and sleep research to improving health outcomes and our partners' outcomes and business outcomes as well.
It's the theme that continues to come up with every expert I talk to in this field, which is, Dr. Kimberly Lemke. She's been on the podcast. She's spoken at Sleep Summit in the past. She talks about how sleep is a daytime issue.
Yeah.
And she jokingly says, you can, take all the melatonin and spray all the lavender on your pillow you want, but if you haven't built up that pressure, she calls it the sleep balloon, it's
Yeah.
not going to have, you're not going to have those good chemicals you need to release and give yourself that great sleep. Are people, whenever that message gets out there, whether it's through SleepScore Labs yourself or a consumer products company, what do you sense as the reaction from people? Are they like, oh, fantastic, I just need to, how much light do I need? Just tell me what to do, and I'm in and I'm sleeping better? Or is it still sort of old culture of like, I don't know, I don't want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're getting at here is like, what are the blockades that are preventing us from taking information that we know is useful and actually implementing it and integrating it into our lives. I think that's sort of what we're like. We know sleep is important. We know some of these things are not good for us. And I wrote a piece on Thrive Global, Ariana Huffington's magazine, a few years ago now, around this exact topic. And I said that there were really three main blockades. The first blockade that I think prevents us from prioritizing sleep is, I think, the result of something called overconfidence bias. And that happens when we essentially overestimate the reliability of our judgments. And I think it's particularly relevant for those of us that think we're working at peak capacity when we're actually not. And the truth is, when we're sleep deprived, this process is exacerbated. It's made way worse. People who are sleep deprived think that they're totally fine and functioning at their peak productivity, more so than those that aren't. So, for example, truck drivers who are habitually sleep deprived, they think that they're perfectly fine. And we know that driving, sleep deprived is comparable to driving under the influence of alcohol. So I think one thing that we need to think about when we're taking all this is, like, we need to recognize this bias by really appreciating the consequences of sleep deprivation and understand really that the only true solution for sleepiness is sleep. And I know that's easier said than done, but that's one blockade. And I think the second one is really that we have this like value of hyper productivity in society over proper sleep health and wellness. And I think that's changing a little bit over the past couple of years. Matthew Walker, some others in the space that have really touted the effects of sleep deprivation are showing that the ROI is stronger for those that sleep the 8 hours versus those that sleep 6 hours and think that they're working 2 hours more. That's not the case. If you get those 8 hours of sleep, your productivity improves drastically. You reduce the effects of health burden. So that's the other one. It's that, like, we need to prioritize sleep in a way that we acknowledge the biases that are out there, and then we know that the hyperproductivity over proper sleep health and wellness. We need to take that and actually just you know we need to remember that far too many people in positions of power use insufficient sleep as a token, and that is not, I think, the right message. I think we should be using sufficient sleep and extending sleep. Like, we should be praising those that are getting 8, 9, even maybe 8 and 9 is enough, 8 and 9 hours of sleep versus those that come into the office and say, "Oh, I got 4 hours of sleep," and yeah, here's your productivity token.
We
And
should
then
be
the last
bemoaning that fact. Like, if somebody
one,
gets 4 or 5 hours of sleep, oh man, I'm so sorry. Like,
yeah,
I hope it's better for you tonight.
exactly. And then the last one is that life happens. Sometimes, like, life happens. And I think one thing the sleep science community has, I think, pushed a little too far on is the idea that sleep deprivation is going to kill us tomorrow. And yes, there are absolutely, some events where, sleep deprivation is very dangerous. But I think we've hyper focused on the negatives when it comes to sleep. There's been a narrative around sleep deprivation and not sleep extension. There is that dark side of sleep, but there really is the beautiful bright side of sleep. And I think the sleep space requires a change in messaging, which is, yes, sleep deprivation is bad and scary, but there are these beautiful things that happen when we get sufficient, consistent quality sleep.
I think it's a great time of year to talk about that as well, with the Olympic Games going on in Paris
Yeah.
and athletic performance and fitness and nutrition and sleep even being top of mind for people,
Yeah.
coupled with, I think post pandemic, many people for the first time ever potentially got their biological sleep needs met. And, let's go there for a minute, like in terms of biological sleep needs. Every person's wired differently, right? Like the color of your eyes, your height, that's sort of, that's your genetic code. Are sleep needs different for every person as well? And that's why we have such a range.
Yeah, I would say they are different. Look, the average person requires 7 to 9 hours of sleep, and there are absolutely differences. That's a huge variation, 7 to 9 hours. So I think for most people, it's like, if you if you were able to sleep as much as you wanted to, what would allow you to feel refreshed in the morning, and what would allow you to work at your peak performance, both cognitively and physically? And I know there's been a lot of media articles around those, what we call the sleepless elites, that there's a very select few of the population that can get around with 5 to 6 hours of sleep and work just fine. The truth is that genetic variation, that genetic mutation, is only found in like 1% of the population, based on some of the research that I've seen. So it's very unlikely that you're that person. So, yes, there is individual variability when it comes to sleep needs, but most people require 7 to 9 hours. And there is, part of my research in during my PhD was looking at the effects of excessively long sleep duration and the effects of that. So there is, we think, maybe a Goldilocks zone where both too little but also too much sleep might be a sign of something that's wrong. In fact, when you really look at some of the data around all cause mortality, right, like dying for any reason, the effects are actually stronger for those that sleep 10 hours or more versus those that are sleeping 5 to 6 hours. And we think that might be because, excessively long sleep duration might mean that the quality of your sleep is not great. Like your body is having to sleep that long because maybe it's spending, sufficient, too long in light sleep, and not, sufficiently long in deep and REM sleep. So yes, there is the Goldilocks zone. There is individual variability. Most people know their body best. So when you feel refreshed in the morning after a certain night of, after sleeping 7 or 8 or 9 hours, that's probably a sign that, that's the amount of time for you.
And I think that's one of the things that comes into play. If you're consistently not getting your sleep needs, there's an amount of time that you need in order to get to that baseline. And you might be sleep deprived and have to, quote unquote, catch up on sleep a little bit or sleep longer until you can normalize and figure out, based on a bedtime and maybe, based on a consistent bedtime, controlling the conditions, I start waking up at X time consistently, feeling the best I can feel. Boom, there's your answer. But not very many people give themselves that gift, I don't think.
It's true. And remember, I think sleep duration is only, as you just mentioned, consistency, right? Sleep duration is only one component of sleep health. And the truth is that, there's actually research now showing that sleep consistency might be even more important than sleep duration when we look at the data and the effects of overall health. So getting that consistent bedtime and wake time within plus or minus 30 minutes is critical, because what happens if you're going to bed, and we also know, we could talk about social jet lag. I think it's a really important topic of conversation, but that inconsistency with your bedtime and wake time, especially from weekdays to weekends, causes this like pseudo jet lag every single weekend, right? And it's very difficult to break, because there's societal influences on the weekends where, like, I finish work at 5 o'clock. Typically, I'd go to bed at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., but it's the weekend and now I get to have fun. So I'm out until 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. And now what happens? My entire sleep schedule shifts. It's not just my bedtime, but now I'm exhausted from the work week, and I'm sleeping in an extra 2 hours. So it's like I've literally traveled from Miami to LA. And unlike travel based jet lag, which only happens when you travel, social based jet lag, which is what this is, happens every single weekend. And we're finding that's, in men, it's associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer, for example. So it can be, pretty dangerous. So we're now trying to find, beyond just sleep duration, which we know is important. There might be that Goldilocks zone, as we mentioned. What's the maximum amount of delta, the difference between your weekday and weekend, where you can get away with it, right? Because, like, people are going to go, like, we have to be realistic. People are going to, they have a weekend, they finally get to enjoy themselves, they're going to go to bed later and wake up later. But what's that maximum where health doesn't start to suffer?
Do we have any initial data that
Yeah,
talks about what that delta might be?
Yeah, 30 minutes to an hour. So after an hour, we start to see health start to suffer. But if you can keep your bedtime and wake time within plus or minus 1 hour, ideally plus or minus 30 minutes, but that's again easier said than done. That's where we start to see, the benefits of consistent sleep retained.
Let's shift gears a little bit. We're here with Dr. Elie Gottlieb with SleepScore Labs. SleepScore Labs has over 440 million hours of sleep data that's being translated into data driven, actionable insights for improving sleep quality. And part of the sleep conversation, we hope, is happening whenever a consumer comes in to buy a mattress, because that's the object on which you spend a third of your life, more than any other, is the mattress. And whenever people think about ways to get good sleep, the data that research projects I've done that are statistically defensible research projects with 2,000 plus consumers balanced across the US, the mattress is like number 5, 6, 7, depending on what time of year it is that you're gathering that data. Whenever somebody comes in to buy a mattress, number one, I think we need to be educated on sleep.
Yeah.
And I know SleepScore Labs does a lot of work with Mattress Firm, which I commend to a very high degree. Let's take it down to the granular level. You're this retail sales associate's sleep coach and business coach, and you want to help them help consumers. What are the key things that you think are memorable and meaningful they can say to the consumer that potentially changes the trajectory of that person's life for the next 10 years until they buy another mattress? What do they need to say?
Wow. That's a good question, Mark. That's a real good one. I think look, first and foremost, we need to equip and arm sleep experts or sales associates with the basic knowledge of sleep and circadian science. So as we mentioned, those two things, right? Sleep pressure, the circadian rhythm, right? The basic fundamentals of those need to be understood in order to call yourself a sleep expert. And as we were talking about earlier, SleepScore has created a sleep certification program with Mattress Firm, where all sleep experts or sales associates that are in the store go through about an 18-hour, very rigorous coursework that covers a broad range of topics related to sleep and circadian science. And I think one thing that's really important, as I mentioned, is the fundamentals of sleep and circadian science. But more important is that everyone's sleep is very different, and everyone requires a personalized and dynamic approach to their sleep health, because one thing that works one day might not work the next day. Sleep, like most behaviors, and especially sleep, it really waxes and wanes across the lifespan. We have periods of acute insomnia that don't last very long. Most people don't have a sleep disorder, but they go through periods of sleep that's really detrimental, and it's probably because of stress. But sometimes it's because of things like temperature or something else in the environment, excessively bright light or insufficient light. And then some of those other common sleep problematic and like triggers, right? So caffeine consumption too close to bedtime, inconsistent bedtimes. And the truth is, sleep health isn't defined by one single behavior. Unfortunately for us, right? Sleep health is defined by the sum of its parts. What does that mean? It means that, for example, if you're having the most consistent bedtime and wake time in the world, you're getting your 8 hours of sleep, and you are working out in the mornings, you're getting that bright sunlight, but you're having a coffee at 10 o'clock at night, you can do everything in the world right. But if you did that one thing wrong, it's going to have a negative effect on your sleep. We've actually published this research where we look at sleep hygiene factors and what individual sleep hygiene factor was most predictive of someone's overall sleep. There wasn't one. There was only when we looked at the aggregate of those scores that we saw sleep improvement. In other words, again, sleep health is not defined by one single behavior to some of its parts. So I think that just basic understanding is what is really useful to sleep experts and sales associates. And that empathy goes a very long way when it comes to sleep. Everyone is dealing with their own sleep battles and circadian battles and just life battles. And I always say stress and anxiety are sleep's worst nightmare. So if we could do anything to take that away from most people, it will do some good.
I'm going to translate that over to the mattress retail environment because I love what you said, and I'm glad there's data to back it up. That there's not one magic answer. There's not a silver bullet whenever it comes to sleep. It is that compounding effect of a myriad of decisions, small decisions throughout the day, and I always say one major purchase because I think if you're comfortable, it's going to help a lot to pay off all that good work you did throughout the day. But to translate it over to like a mattress retail environment, if you have great products and you're sitting there going, why am I not selling any? Did you do any advertising? Whenever you get somebody in the store, are you terrible at selling them? Do you screw up delivery and like track mud all over people's houses? Do you ask for reviews? All of these things need to be working in concert. Otherwise, you just got a violin going in the corner. It's not an orchestra. It's all these things working together. So that's what I hear whenever you explain it's not just one hygiene factor. So, okay, I got to drill down though. Give us the handful of hygiene factors that if somebody's going to go out today and they're going to take control of their sleep the best they can, I'm gonna give you an easy one. They're gonna wake up and they're gonna go outside and get sunlight for 10 minutes. Is that a good start?
It's a great start. I mean, like I said, it's the start of your day. So we know that bright light improves performance, improves our mood, and the truth is that it's free. So if you have access to sunlight, I'm lucky enough, and other people in California, we pay a lot for it, but we're lucky
Is
enough
it?
to get we're lucky enough to get the sunlight most days of the year. But go outside, go outside 10, 15 minutes. Not saying you look directly at the sun, but you would be surprised at that effect on when you get back in the house. You're going to feel better, very likely. And it's going to set your circadian rhythm. It's going to let your brain know, okay, it's time to be productive. It's time to be awake. And then also, if you need your coffee, go for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with caffeine, so long as you're having your last cup of coffee around 6 to 8 hours before bedtime. There's in science we call it the half-life. How long does it take your body to metabolize 50% of whatever that thing is? And for caffeine, it's about 6 hours. So, reverse engineer that for yourself. And
I
then
call it a caffeine curfew. So
curfew. I love that.
you got your sunlight, you got a caffeine curfew. Mine's noon. I just take it out of the equation if at all possible. So okay, we got two good ones there.
Yeah.
Sunlight and then having a caffeine curfew.
Yeah, caffeine curfew. And I think there's much more to light hygiene. I just want to talk about light for a second because I think it's so important. There's I would say there's four things when it comes to light hygiene that I'd recommend. As I mentioned, within the first 15 minutes of waking up, get that sunlight. Throughout the daytime, get consistent natural indoor light if you can. And then during the evening, starting about 3 hours before bedtime, I dim most of my lights and I try to avoid light that's brighter than like twilight or street lighting. And then while sleeping, keep your bedroom environment as dark as possible. No brighter than natural sunlight. And those are just the four essentials when it comes to light. And I think we've all heard of the basic sleep hygiene recommendations. Caffeine, as we're talking about, consistency, but there's other, I think, more bespoke and unique hygiene recommendations that I really like, and that is around circadian hygiene. So going back to this lighting, but on, beyond just light, your brain adores consistency. So going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, if possible. We talked about that plus or minus 1 hour. And then in addition to light, our brain synchronizes to exercising and eating. So the timing of these behaviors consistently causes this sort of like anticipatory increase in alertness and attention. And then last but not least, lean into your chronotype if you can. If you are a strong evening type or you're a strong morning type, and it's called the morningness eveningness questionnaire. I highly recommend that people fill it out. You can find it online for free. Figure out what your chronotype is. There's typically 5 of them. There's strong evening, slight evening, intermediate types, slight morning, and strong morning. Find out what your chronotype is and then time those daytime behaviors based on your chronotype. And if you don't know where to start, the SleepScore app has a circadian scheduler in it. So you can fill out what we'll ask you what we think your we'll tell you what we think your chronotype is, and then give you some recommendations when it comes to timing of certain behaviors.
Score app right here on my phone. Okay,
Awesome.
so you're saying within the app, you can figure out what your chronotype is based on a little quiz?
Yeah, so during the onboarding, it'll ask you a few questions that will give us some indication as to your potential chronotype. And then from that, if you go to the solutions page, there's some other pages on there that it'll give you a breakdown of your the ideal timing of certain behaviors based on your chronotype. So when are you most creative, for example? When's your peak physical performance? When's your peak cognitive performance? Those kinds of things.
I love the app, by the way. There is so much detail. You have the ideal bedroom. You have a sleep report, a snore quiz, sleep library. Now you have meditation. What is Prove It? You have a Prove It section.
Yeah, this is a really cool feature. We have a partnership with International Flavors and Fragrances, and of course with Mattress Firm as well, where we've created evidence-based products, like, for example, the Sleepy's pillow insert, which is a pillow insert that you put right under your pillow, and it includes Meta Scent fragrance, which is a proprietary fragrance that we've actually shown in scientific studies to improve the amount of time it takes to fall asleep, and then of course stay asleep throughout the night. I use it every single night. It just smells beautiful. If you love perfume and colognes, I highly recommend it. And then the Prove It feature is essentially, it allows you to see if it works for you. So you can track your sleep for 7 days before using it, use the Prove It feature while you're using it, and then you can see the effect of that product on your own objectively measured sleep.
I got that section pulled up right here. And as you can see, you can do the 7-day track. It's for the pillow inserts. So being a part of something bigger and seeing if it works for you specifically. So you're able to throw off some of that data to contribute to the broader good, I assume, and then also figure out, hey, is this doing its thing for me?
Exactly. And going back to the sleep hygiene things, I think there's other more bespoke tips that I really think are important for people. And that is, whenever you've had a bad night of sleep, Matthew Walker always says it best: do nothing. Don't sleep in the next day. Don't nap if you don't need to. Don't try to go to bed earlier the next evening as well, right? Just do nothing. Luckily, the great thing about a poor night of sleep is that you will have built up that pressure for the next day. You're going to be exhausted. Most people are going to be exhausted the next day. So do nothing is always what I say. If you're napping, you're reducing some of that sleep pressure. If you're sleeping in later the next day or going to bed earlier the next day, you're going against the grain of your circadian rhythm. And then another fun tidbit that I recently found a study on was around counting sheep, right? A lot of people, we always say, count sheep in order to go to bed. But actually, Dr. Allison Harvey from UC Berkeley, she actually found that people who went on while they were trying to go to bed, when people that took themselves on like a well-known mental walk, they're just picturing a relaxing scene, they fell asleep over 20 minutes faster than the group that was just counting sheep. So don't count sheep. Take yourself on a well-known, high-fidelity detail mental walk somewhere that you love, and that's been shown to significantly improve the amount of time it takes to fall asleep. And then the last thing that I always like to mention is that sleep is not a light switch. You can't just turn it off and on, right? Like, I'm sure you understand. Sometimes we have very late meetings. If I close my laptop at 10 p.m. and I try to fall asleep, it's not going to happen, right? You need to, it takes time to build up that pressure and rhythm and be in a really relaxed state. So whatever puts you in a relaxed, reduced state, do that. But remember, it's not a light switch. It's sort of like landing a plane. So if you're frustrated that you can't fall asleep 10 minutes right after you close your laptop after an important meeting, I mean, it sort of makes sense, right? So give yourself the grace to wind down before you actually try to fall
Find
asleep.
that off ramp. Absolutely. I love how you broke down light hygiene just as its own sort of discipline, let's call it,
Yeah.
within sleep hygiene in general. And I think if I were going to have like one takeaway right now for myself, I'm like, gosh, like thinking about light hygiene and timing. Like you said, timing your fitness, your workout, timing going to
Yeah.
bed, and then just doing nothing. When we can achieve that as long as you don't fall asleep and take a nap. Doing nothing should
Exactly.
be pretty achievable. Now, can you do nothing and not be super crabby throughout the day? It's a hard maybe, but hopefully you can get
Yeah.
past it, get a good
You'll
night's
make
sleep.
up for it the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll make up for it the next day. With that said, a caveat: if you need to drive and you got less than 4 hours of sleep, do nap. Do take, because it could be dangerous. So do nothing. If you slept just generally poor quality, it was poor quality. But if you slept less than 4 hours and you need to get somewhere, you get behind the wheel of a car and you're driving on less than 4 hours of sleep. That's comparable to being drunk driving. So be very careful. So do nothing to an extent.
Yeah.
Just
Always a
important
nuance
caveat.
there within the sleep space.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Dr. Elie Gottlieb, like you're dropping some really great information on us, and I can't thank you enough. But I have to have you look into a crystal ball. So being
Yeah.
behind the scenes at SleepScore Labs, where you're trying to put together this evidence-based ecosystem, many times attaching it to sleep products, corporate wellness environments. Let's go straight to the mattress. If you had to look at the crystal ball in relation to what your company is doing, and let's say that you get sort of widespread adoption from within the sleep products world, what does buying a mattress look like, sound like, message like in 10 to 20 years?
Yeah. In a very simple way, almost automated. We have an incredibly rich data source that combines your objectively measured sleep, your temperature, your ideal, a sleeping position, and we essentially gather that data from you. And the second that you walk into a store, you don't need to try 50 different types of mattresses. We can tell you right there and then, this is the ideal mattress for you. You can try it, but we've shown in scientific studies that you use this mattress, there is a habituation period. People tend to sleep worse before they sleep better on anything that's new, but this process will allow you to sleep significantly better. That is an automated approach that takes the guessing work out of a range of factors. So I think that the sales associate and the sleep experts will absolutely still play a role in educating consumers around the importance of sleep. Right? They're typically, some of the first, experts that a consumer will actually interact with when it comes to sleep. Very few people actually go see a sleep doctor, so they're a great resource for individuals that are trying to get a better understanding of their overall sleep. And that, not to put the pressure on them, but it is on them. And then they take this sort of personalized and dynamic and science-backed approach to a mattress and any kind of bedding product.
I just think about the possibility and the potential in that sort of interaction versus what's happening today, where people come in to buy a mattress and they aren't sure if they're going to get ripped off. They don't know if something's being sold to them just based on a spiff. And now having some real sort of proxy for yourself, because the more sleep data that companies like SleepScore Labs captures, especially in relation to the products and the person's profile, now all of a sudden I can go, hey, guys in their mid 40s or early 40s in my case. Okay, I'm hanging on to it. Guys in the early 40s with this level, this body type, this weight, this height, this level of fitness, these aches and pains, if any, those people show that they're improving their sleep on products like this. That to me is highly compelling. And again, it takes it to a science-backed approach as opposed to, we think you look like your spine's in pretty good alignment over here.
Yeah, I totally agree. What works and to what extent does it work and for whom? That's what we really want to create. The ideal personalized sleep product for that individual person and consumer, and then show that it actually does have a objectively measured, as we talk about from a scientific way, statistically significant effect on someone's sleep, and that they feel better, right? Like objectively measured sleep is important, but you got to feel better as well. Just because it objectively improves your sleep, it can objectively improve your REM and deep sleep, but if you still feel the same, so it's merging those two fields of objective and subjective evidence.
All right, Dr. Elie Gottlieb here on the FAM podcast. Can't thank you enough for being here. I want you to leave us with one final thought around this question. You joined SleepScore Labs more than 3 years ago. What has surprised you most based on the research you've done or something you've learned or an interaction you've had? What's been most surprising to you, or maybe something you changed your mind about?
Yeah, I think for a long time, as I mentioned earlier, we as a society have focused on sleep disorders. And again, that population requires attention. But most people don't have a sleep disorder. Most people have really poor sleep and don't know where to go. They're sort of left to their own devices. They Google, they're just trying to be their own sleep expert. And most people need someone else to help them make informed decisions about their sleep health. So, 60 to 75% of that population requires some sleep health, and most consumers are looking for it. They're trying to improve their sleep and they're trying to improve their overall health. And we know that improving sleep has a cascading effect on our overall health and wellness. So I think what's exciting is the possibilities in terms of improving sleep are endless. We're in this real exciting inflection point where we now have evidence-based and relatively scalable solutions that can improve people's sleep health. I'm just excited to see how it has a cascading effect on the rest of our physiology and our disease state. So it's an exciting time.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, your research-backed insights, and your passion for this. There's so many people in this industry, like I talk about on the podcast before. About 10% of people at any moment are in the market for a mattress, and like you said, a lot of them, this is their first interaction whenever it comes to sleep. And if we can slightly nudge the trajectory of that person's life in a more positive direction, like you said, no pressure, but the pressure's there. So I think we need to equip ourselves and arm ourselves with as much knowledge as possible. And so, hey, if you listen to this and you picked up some tidbits, share them with us. Hop over on LinkedIn. We're really active over there. Send them to your team members. And we always put notes up on thefam.com. So go search for Dr. Elie Gottlieb. Thank you, sir, so much for being here. It's a pleasure. I look forward to having your CEO, Colin Lawler. He's going to be speaking at Sleep Summit 2024. So if you haven't signed up for Sleep Summit, that's going to happen. Arrive October 8th. It's going to be all day the 9th and the 10th with a raucous party at the night of the 10th. And then we'll depart and hopefully get back to those good sleep schedules after that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for being here. And make sure and subscribe and share this podcast with a friend or colleague. And we'll see you back here every Monday on the FAM podcast.